Que a paz do Senhor esteja sobre a sua vida. O objetivo deste canal e deste vídeo é a pregação do Evangelho de Nosso Senhor Jesus Cristo. Este vídeo foi capturado e legendado em português para sua comodidade e edificação. Peço em Cristo que, caso tenha sido edificado, curta o vídeo no canal original. Os dados estão na descrição. Que o Espírito Santo revele a Cristo ao seu coração.
This is an exciting episode for me because for as long as I can remember, I have been fascinated with the idea of heaven. I'm here with someone that I met recently. It's becoming a friend of mine, Randy K. Randy, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Chad. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really glad you're on the show today. I've been looking forward to having a conversation with you. So I love God's stories. I love things that happen that you can't explain. It was about a month and a half ago. I go on my kitchen table and I open up a package of some man I'd never heard of who had written a book about going to heaven and coming back. And his name was Randy K. And the next evening, after reading that book in one day and crying my eyes out because it made me just so full of joy, I had dinner with you and I had no idea. It took me a second to realize, wait a minute, I just read this man's book because our publisher had hooked us up to have a dinner together. And I tell you, your book just really, really, really blessed me. I'm sure you've been asked about your story so many times, but the basic premise is this: you didn't see it coming. You were in a hospital room. The next thing you know, you're standing in front of Jesus Christ. I don't know, Randy, maybe you get tired of telling your story. I know how it is when people ask me things. It's like, my goodness, I've told about my nervous breakdown 7 billion times. But you want to just recap your story and what in the world happened to you?
Yes. Well, Chad, you know, I was a corporate guy, and I had led companies, pharmaceutical companies. I was the CEO of a biotech company, all that stuff. So it really didn't amount to the proverbial hill of beans. And that I was also involved in the church. And the church really was something that I thought was akin to working within the corporate world. Quite frankly, the rules were very analogous to those rules that I experienced. So it was a very easy transition. So I went through a crisis of faith because I had flown back from Washington, D.C. to introduce a potential cure for Alzheimer's. And then the FDA withdrew our drug. We had been on the front cover of Time magazine and all of the major networks. And so stock obviously dropped. The biotech company that I led, we needed to raise about $60 million for that to keep it afloat. And then my daughter experienced many strokes. So this was all happening essentially at the same time. And I remember being in my room and I was staring at the ceiling. The moonlight was casting a shadow across the ceiling, and it was kind of reflective of the ominous condition of my soul. And I cried out to God, having served him in church and taught in church, having been a Christian after having been an agnostic for many years. And I said, God, you know, I faithfully served you. At least I thought I did, but, you know, I still don't have that level of intimacy. In these times of trouble, it seems like you're not answering my prayer. And I'm angry at you. And I need you to show up. And I really did say that. I need you to show up. I was that declarative to God Almighty. You know, and he could have done something to me that was of a very violent nature, but he didn't. And he was just left me kind of staring at the wall. I was halfway expecting that he would show up, just a visage of Jesus. And so I was left in this condition for a couple of weeks, and I was flying back to interview with a large healthcare company. And I came back and landed in San Diego and went straight to bed. The next morning, I got my bike, started bicycling up the coast, along the ocean, and what would normally be a very easy ride on the bicycle, looking at the glassy ocean and the sun morning sun breaking against the surface of the ocean was a struggle for me. I had difficulty breathing, and I had asthma and other lung problems in my life from childhood, but this was different. And it was a straight bicycle ride, but it felt like I was bicycling up a hill because I could hardly breathe and my calf was very sore. So I made it back home and I started making breakfast, and I emptied out the garbage, which was just alongside the house, and that trek to the garbage felt like a 100-mile trek to me. I tried getting up the stairs, and I could hardly make it up the stairs. By this time, it felt like a 50-pound weight had been tied to my calf. It was about 1.5 times its size. So I knew that we were planning a trip, and I wanted to get an anti-inflammatory. I knew, having led clinical teams, being in the clinical space, that this was more than just a calf strain. But I was looking for a quick fix. So I went to the doctor to get an anti-inflammatory, and then I collapsed, and I was rushed to the ER. Various tests, CAT scans, blood tests, D-dimer showing the blood clotting agent in the bloodstream. All of those tests showed that I had, by this time, because I had let it go, 6 blood clots. And as they travel up the leg from the calf, they enlarge, and they had lodged themselves in my lung, and specifically in the pulmonary artery, which is the main blood flow to the lungs. So I was literally suffocating to death. And pulmonary embolism is the third leading cause of death. The doctor walked in the room initially and said, you were a walking dead man. They wanted to transfer me to UCSD, University of California, San Diego, to crack open my chest to remove the clots because they were so advanced. But by that time, it was too late, and was determined that I would be dead by the time I got there. Coupled with the fact that there was a patient that was quickly ushered out of the room next to me, and came to find out that he had a contagious disease, and that was resistant to antibiotics. And that was now coursing through my bloodstream through the IV solution. So instead of just having the blood flow to the lung being blocked by blood clots, I was clotting throughout my body. The doctor tried to remove blood from my arm, a blood sample, and he could not. He could not withdraw any blood. So I started flopping around like a fish out of water, and unable to breathe, intubated, and then everything went still. It was like the initial feeling was like somebody was tugging at my shirt. I remember that distinctly because that was the part where my spirit was releasing, and I became a third party to my body, and I could see my body on the bed, and I was being pulled by this light. And in the distance were these warring figures. They were otherworldly. They were gangly and much taller, larger than I, and not at all akin to what I looked like. And I couldn't figure them out because on one side they were worn and they looked like something out of a horror flick. And then on the other side, they were brilliantly adorned, and they were both fighting with what looked like swords. And the light was shining against the one side, which I later came to believe were the angels fighting against the demons over my soul, my conflicted soul. Even though I was born again, there was a dynamic going on that I did not, even to this day, fully understand. And I knew I had to cry out the name of Jesus, the one I had accused. It just struck me. The one I had accused of abandoning me. And I was immediately by the side of a figure I knew was Jesus. And he leaned his face. He was side by side with me and leaned his face into my cheek. And my first thought was, this is love. And his first words to me were, trust me. And I was not a trusting person. And I caved in a flood of tears and awe and reverence to my Lord of Lords and King of Kings, my God. And then he put his left arm around my shoulder, turned me toward him, and lifted me up. And we were face to face. And I was looking into the eyes of love. And they tunneled into every dark place within me, illuminating me with his light. And I felt not just a trivial sense of his love, but I sensed what it was like to be in the consummate, total presence of God in all the facets of love that we have ascribed to this world were not adequate to describe what it was like, except that his grace was manifested in a way that I had never experienced before, as I had these various vignettes that of my life, both good and bad. But the bad ones, Chad, they didn't condemn me. They only reflected back to the grace of God in all things. And I remember saying to Jesus, I didn't think you could forgive me of that. And he didn't even have to speak with words, because I knew the mind of Christ in my spirit body had possessed me so fully that I was seeing through his eyes, in a sense. And I was seeing these vignettes of my life passing by. Chad, there are no words to explain what that's like. And there was nothing in heaven, all the glories that I saw, that would adequately compare or even they were trivial in comparison to being in the presence of God Almighty.
I wrote a book years ago called Signs, Wonders, and a Baptist Preacher, largely in part of my encounter with the Lord. I didn't know what an open vision was. I was a cessationist. I didn't understand any of this. And I saw him in an open vision. It was more real than me looking at you. And he said, I'm your healer. Trust me. He said it twice. And there was a love that came from him. And I thought it was going to kill me. I mean, that love ruined me forever for this world, for sure. He is the most amazing centerpiece in human history. Let me ask you this. It's funny, we had dinner and I didn't ask you anything about heaven. I just got to know you. Did you have any inkling you were about to leave your body?
I did. I realized I'd cried out to the Lord, God save me, this imploring him in a prayer of desperation. God literally had caused me to give up. And at that point, which I told the doctors, if I became a vegetable, I didn't want to become a vegetable, just let me go. And I realized that when I started flopping around and going into spasms, that I had lost control and there was nothing that could be done. There just absolutely was nothing that could be done to mitigate that situation. So it was at that point where I went still in that nanosecond of time that I know I was leaving. And I wasn't cognizant at that point because I had always been, trying to reason things out. It didn't matter. It didn't matter at that point because it wasn't a letting go so much as it was a being let go, if that makes any sense. A being let go versus my consciously letting go. I did not consciously let go, but I had surrendered to this presence. It was at peace. It was the most, Chad, it was the most freeing experience of my life. Death, the point at which my heart stopped, over 30 minutes. And shortly thereafter, my brain, was the most freeing, liberating experience of my life. And you're right. Love, as we try to explain it, in all of the attributes of heaven, and I do write about them. But people want to know what he looks like, what heaven looks like, and I tell them as much as I can. Others that want to know, what those attributes are and what the features are, and having being able to go through heaven and look at the vistas and see those things, and as well as the veins in a leaf, and having this kind of telescopic vision, if you will. But I always want to draw back to being in the presence of Jesus. He never left my side, and that was all consuming. You could have thrown me into a trash bin, and I would have been fine with that, because nothing else mattered. Nothing else mattered. And then he showed me the glory, the full glory of the throne room. The throne room was not like a lounge chair, surrounded by brilliant light. There was light. There was a brilliancy of light. But I was exposed to the triune God. I was exposed to God the Father. And God the Father had an appearance that was different from Jesus. They were one and the same, and I was conscious of I was aware of the Holy Spirit as well, who was kind of the impressions that I gained from the Lord, and Jesus spoke to me audibly. And then when he revealed the Father in the throne room, and Jesus was right there at the throne, and that's another thing for which there are no words. So he was with me, and he was on the throne with the Father, and the brilliancy all around through the throne. But this thing was very interesting, I think, in that the colors from the throne, the brilliancy of the light and the magnificence were of all varieties with the exception of blue. And I looked on the floor of the throne were these brilliant cobalt blue-like stones, and they were giving off a flame that did not burn, because I saw figures, angels and others, walking through these flames, these non-burning flames that were emanating from these blue stones, which formed this ground around the throne. And I realized that God the Father was speaking forth creation, newness. And it was the most incredible experience in that I saw the birthing of things that were new. I know Ecclesiastes talks about there being nothing new under the sun, but from the throne of God, there was a newness being created from the Father as being poured down on earth. And then Jesus had opened a window to this world momentarily, and I saw the busyness of people going back and forth and doing this and that. And everything in heaven, all of my experiences had purpose. So I knew that there was nothing inconsequential to anything that Jesus was revealing to me there. And so I turned to him and I said, we were looking at these people, and why are you looking at them? And he said, I'm looking for those who are wise. And I said, well, who are those that are wise? And he said, those who are listening to me.
Wow.
And I saw the busyness, and I immediately, because I had this intuitive knowing sense in heaven, I knew that what the Lord was revealing is that there were those that I was seeing who were so busy, caught up in the cares of the world. And I raised my hand on that one, by the way, that as far as getting caught up in the cares of the world, that they were ignoring the voice of God. And having seen the throne where the the literal voice of God, that is the expression of God from the throne, was being ignored. And that was a newness of purpose. It could be a newness of life in the birthing of life, physical life on earth. It could be the newness of creation of whatever it is, a ministry or something, but that was new. Everything was speaking from the throne. And yet there were those who were being spoken to who were ignoring the voice of God. And Jesus referenced that as wisdom, the voice of God telling us what to do. And there were many blinded to that. And when I say that, I oftentimes think, well, everyone except for me. No, I am blind to that. That's what convicts me, Chad, to this very day, that I all too often ignore the voice of God telling me what to do. Prophecy, I think, and this better than I, the definition of Greek, Hebrew translation of prophecy, essentially was truth-telling, and knowing the truth was listening to the voice of God telling us what to do. It was basically being a vehicle of that expression from God. And yet it was a manufacturing that I saw of people just going about their way and not listening and therefore not executing the will of God.
What you're describing, it's funny to me is how old it is. The oldest Hebraic prayer in the world is the Shema, hear and obey. And in the Hebrew language, you cannot differentiate the hearing and obeying. So a true Jew, it's you hear and obey, and they're one. And here we are, all these thousands of years later, you're saying the same thing.
Yes. That's the thing about the experiences. I'll have people like yourself who will come and say, "Oh, this is what here it is in the Bible," and what have you. And I've gone through ordination and I've studied the Bible. I've read the Bible, but you just illuminated something to me that through that, and so I'm constantly learning, even to this day, several years later. So that's what God was talking about. But in heaven, the interesting thing, Chad, is that I had that understanding. I had that sense of knowing because I was in the presence, the full presence. Here we have in part, dimly, then I was face to face with him, and the fullness of God was with me. And so the elucidation of what he was speaking to me, I understood. And then I found myself in this body, and I was struggling in this body, and I had my brain, and by the way, I don't know if I suffered much brain damage, but that's a long period of time to go without blood flow. I do suffer from damage in my vascular system, and here I am to this day struggling with many of those things. And I'll get quiet with the Lord, and there was an impartation of knowing God, and yet being in my body and being frustrated that I wanted or desired earnestly to know him as I knew him in heaven. That's what we have to look forward to, but it's a discipline, as you say, from hearing the voice of God and obeying the voice of God, which are two different things. Because, I get back to the two words that he spoke to me, trust me. And I thought, I had trusted him implicitly in heaven, and I never fully understood that until after the fact. And I thought, why would Jesus say, trust me, when I was I was in consummate relationship with Jesus at that time, and I trusted him implicitly. How could I not? And yet he was telling me because he knew I needed to know that here in this world when I returned. And that's the constant voice that I hear now of Jesus saying, trust me. And I'm not a trusting person. I don't think others are very trusting. We are, as a human nature people, we are not that trusting of the Lord, And it was the unbelief of the Israelites coming out of Egypt that caused them to wander for 40 years. Well, it should have taken them a little bit over a week. It was because of their unbelief. And so now my prayer, my consistent prayer is, Lord, open my spiritual eyes and ears to hear you. Increase my faith to trust you. And then magnify my fortitude to follow you all the days of my life. I had asked him in heaven, why, he told me that he was returning me for a purpose, because I had not yet fulfilled my purpose. And so I asked him, give me a blueprint, please. Or I didn't say it in those terms, but please, Lord, just tell me what my purpose is then. And a butterfly landed on my shoulder. And everything in heaven is beautiful, and the colors, more magnified than anything here. The fragrances, everything is magnified to the nth degree. And so I was marveling at this butterfly resting on my shoulder, but again, knowing that there's intentionality to everything that was happening, I asked Jesus what this butterfly was about, and because I didn't know intuitively what it was, and he said, it's the voice of wisdom telling you what to do. And I knew that that was representative, not the Holy Spirit, but was representative of the wisdom that I would need to be attuned to in order to find my purpose. And so I had asked him for my purpose, thinking it was more of a status or a position or something that would be normally explained by what we term a purpose for our lives, vocationally and otherwise. And he said, moment by moment, I will reveal my purpose to you. And that was an epiphany to the most, for me, returning to the greatest extent possible. He was telling me that I needed to steep myself in his presence, and then moment by moment in the situation. And I've lived differently as a result of returning, because that dinner that you talked about when we were together, that was a moment, and I'm thinking, Lord, okay, what is to be gleaned from this moment? And I have had an affinity for you in particular, Chad, because I had the opportunity to read a book that you have coming out in December, and Your God is Shaking His Temple is a book that people need to absolutely read, by the way. It's going behind me in on the top of the fireplace there. It truly was an epiphany for me, because I thought, this man gets it. He gets it. And rarely do I come across those who I would say that about. I shouldn't say rarely, but it's not as frequent as I would like. And you understand what it means to live in this world, ushered forth, having known what the intention is in heaven. And that to me was very uplifting and yet convicting at the same time.
Was that butterfly yellow?
It was a variety of colors. There was yellow, there was some reds and blues in the butterfly, but certainly there was a yellow tint to it. This is another thing, Chad, I can remember vividly. So I could probably, if I were an artist, I could probably draw out or try to draw out the butterfly. But there was a blue, there was a yellow, there was a slight tinge of kind of more of a light red, pinkish hue. And it was reflective of this brilliancy of light that was emanating from Jesus. And you asked me that question about yellow. There was a significance to that. So,
well, the reason I ask is I've been walking in the prophetic for about 20 years after my encounter with the Lord. I went a lifetime thinking God was always disappointed in me. And when I realized that the Father was the nicest person that's ever existed, I just really wanted to hear his voice. And I didn't even know to call it prophetic back then, but I just fell in love with him and stumbled into the prophetic and then realized that charismatics actually had a term for it. And anyway, I was one of the funniest prophetic moments I've ever had is there was someone I grew up with, and she was just in a really rough spot and had a lot of questions. And I could just feel the Father's compassionate heart all over her. And she was in a lot of doubt. And I started prophesying about a yellow butterfly. And I didn't even know what was flowing out of my spirit. And in the natural, a yellow butterfly flies and lands on her shoulder. And I was prophesying a lot of things, and I didn't think she was receiving them. And when I said yellow butterfly, and then the yellow butterfly came and landed on her, it was quite a breakthrough moment. So I was curious. I don't know if you read about that part in your book about the butterfly. I can't remember, but whenever I hear stories like that, and I've seen some things happen down here, I like to ask people their experiences. Let me ask you this. A lot of young leaders in the marketplace listen to this podcast, Coach and Joe. You're actually a CEO. You've been in the business world for a long time, and you had a very radical encounter with Jesus, but you actually lean towards leadership. You're not on the church staff. You're not a pastor. You're a normal guy like most people. You're in the business world, you're married, kiddos, but leadership is something that has really God has had you in for a long time. I want to ask you this, since you've come back from your experience in heaven, in the marketplace, what do you know now since that experience that you wish you would have known back in the early days of the marketplace? What would you share to young marketplace leaders? You're a CEO and someone who's had a radical encounter. What do they need to know?
Yeah, I'm going to a breakfast tomorrow with some leaders, CEOs, and military leaders, high-ranking officers. Basically, I think from the experience in heaven that changed me as a leader was being the follower most profoundly. And you talked about the butterfly and the example that you shared, Chad, with this woman. The butterflies are very sensitive, so you can't move. That's another reason why Jesus, I think, used the butterfly resting on my shoulder, because I knew that I had to be still. And I knew that I had to be still and listen to God. I knew that I had to be still, get quiet. I think it's Psalm 46:10, and know that he is God. So I knew that the stillness of my soul was something in executive positions, as your leaders know very well, you're always torn between this and that, this project or this problem and this issue that needed, and you think strategically at the 10,000 foot level, and you're always strategizing and synthesizing information to come up with a solution that's not just the fixing the problem, but actually creating another whatever to further the organization. And it's hard for a leader to get still with God. It's hard to remain still. And what I noticed in some of my leadership is I would just break away. I would, if there was in the midst of things, and I would tell whether it's an admin person or whether it's somebody who reported to me, I said, you know what? I heard it, got it. And before we call a meeting, I want to take a time out. And so what I would do differently then, post-heaven, was because I went back into the corporate world and I led a very successful team within Johnson & Johnson, a large corporation. And is I would take more timeouts. And then I might walk out, whether it be an office building there's a field there or something, or just get in the car and just be still in the car. And that timeout was so invaluable. And I would just, by trusting him and getting still with God and listening to the voice of wisdom telling me what to do, oftentimes, almost invariably, I would go in and I would say, let's either, let's get the meeting together, or let's do this or do that. And it was so much better than what I had as a preconception of what I needed to do prior to getting away and alone with God and listening to the voice of wisdom telling me what to do. It just had a profound effect. And I had more success, I think, in my career in the corporate world than I'd had ever previously. We had an organization, we were launching minimally invasive heart surgery, not a small thing. And so we had teams of clinicians that I led and teams of people in the development, and we'd bring them into, we never lost a single patient. And this was not an experimental procedure. It was beyond that, but it was a procedure where the likelihood of something going wrong. And we were in every major hospital in the United States, in Canada, in much of the world, in Europe and Israel and what have you. We had expanded exponentially. It was the most phenomenal experience, and it was all predicated on really getting still with God, I think, and I'd attribute that change in attitude because it changed me, because I didn't get as stressed out about these things. If something went wrong, I knew that the Lord was in control. I knew that he was speaking from his throne. I knew he was giving parting things, even if I wasn't listening to them. And I would just say, God, I am so thick-headed. I am just, I feel really walled off. But if you would do this for me, please, if you would just take me out of the equation right now and just do your will somehow. Romans 8:28, just work it for good. Because I know oftentimes an impediment, just turn it around, make it happen some way, somehow. And God heard that. Oftentimes he always hears that, by the way. He always hears that. And, that promise, all things work for good to those that belong to him and are called according to his purpose. It's the waiting period, as we know, that is so difficult. Because we know that, and it's where is it, Lord? Where's the answer? And I was working, and I was bringing 5 companies together, from different parts, and it was like I expected things were going awry, and then the Lord just said, "Okay, this is what we're going to do," and it happened just in a small time when I'm waking up in the middle of the night, and then it was that. It was that was the answer. Or somebody else would do it, and I just needed to be obedient to let that other person do my job. And that was the art of delegation and letting go and letting God take control, using somebody else and just abrogating, that is giving up, surrendering my position of authority or my position of responsibility so that somebody else could do it, because I realized that God was using an orchestra of people to accomplish his task, and that it wasn't all about yours truly.
So basically, you've learned to trust him, which is what he told you while you were in heaven.
It's so simple, isn't it? It's just crazy simple. And yet, when you think about it, it is probably the hardest thing to do. We wonder why miracles don't happen, why prayers aren't answered. And the trusting in God is not so much, the impartation of God's will, which I realized from the throne. It's a trusting that our responsibility is to discover or uncover where that will is being manifested, and it could be in the strangest of ways. The loss of a job for somebody could be devastating. I call those seminal moments. And we all have them in life. Loss of a job, loss of a loved one. They're cataclysmic moments that just change everything about what we're doing or what we're about. And those are opportunities. And so we oftentimes, we go back to this, try to go back to the same, but the same is really never the same. And so trying to go back to the way it was or this or that, instead of, and here's the epiphany, I think, Chad, in terms of, a fresh understanding. And that is, instead of waiting for the seminal moment, the crash to come, the loss of this or the change in that, How about planning for it? How about that dream that kind of steeped for a while that never got realized because I had to put the proverbial food on the table? How about planning that in advance and trusting God to provide? And that's what I'm doing now, because I'm trusting God to provide, because I know that there's a sense of urgency that he has right now. There's a sense of urgency to get it done. And getting it done is really, for me, stepping out of that proverbial comfort zone. So plan for the seminal moments, don't wait for them to happen, because they will happen invariably, and there's no going back to the same. You've experienced that, Chad.
Yeah.
What you're going through.
When you learn to trust him in seminal moments, to me, it's like compound interest over years. When the next ones come, you don't just lean on fresh rhema, you lean on past victories of trusting him in those difficult moments. It comes for everybody. I tell you, I really appreciate you being part of today's show. And I want you to tell the listening audience of Coach and Joe the title of your book and where they can buy that, and your podcast.
Thank you. Revelations from Heaven is the name of the book. And it's in all of the major outlets, published by Destiny Image. And the podcast I do with Sean Tabbitt, called Two Christian Dudes. You can go to the Randy K YouTube channel, and you can also watch a series of teaching moments and episodes. And we have the Two Christian Dudes on there as well, where we interview a number of people and about a variety of stuff. We're doing, by the way, a series on near-death experience and afterlife experiences. So I've had the pleasure of talking with Sean and other guests who have had somewhat similar experiences to my own.
I can't wait for you to fly out to Greenville, South Carolina, and to share your story at the Garden Greenville. I'm also going to get you to share it at our school called Ascent University. For all you Coach and Joe people out there interested in joining us at Ascent, go to jointheascent.com. Randy, thank you for being a part of today's show, and I really hope that what you had to share just blesses a lot of people. Matter of fact, let me speak a blessing over this. In the name of Jesus, may today's show go into so many ears of unlikely people in the marketplace that can find hope in the